The phone rang at 2 in the morning, and I knew immediately something was wrong. My mother's voice came through shaking, desperate. She was crying, begging me to wire $50,000 because they were about to lose their house. I sat up in bed, confused. My parents had owned a profitable hardware store in Nebraska for 30 years. Then she admitted through sobs that they'd sold Henderson Hardware 6 months ago and gave my brother Tyler $130,000 for a cryptocurrency mining business. It collapsed in 3 months. Now they were broke, and Tyler had disappeared. I hung up and sat there in my Denver apartment, my mind racing, unable to process what I'd just heard. Henderson Hardware was everything to my family. It wasn't just a business. It was the heart of our small Nebraska town of Millbrook, population 8,000. My father, Frank Henderson, had built that store from absolutely nothing over 35 years. I could still remember being 12 years old, spending every summer there, learning how to stack inventory, help customers find the right screws and bolts, operate the cash register. My dad taught me about profit margins, customer loyalty, the importance of showing up even when you didn't feel like it. That store raised me as much as my parents did. My younger brother Tyler, 3 years behind me, never showed any interest. While I was learning the business, he was in his room dreaming up schemes. Get rich, quick ideas. Multi-level marketing pitches he'd try on our parents over dinner. Investment opportunities that always sounded too good to be true because they were. Tyler was always chasing something, never satisfied with the steady, honest work our father modeled every single day. I left Millbrook for college when I was 18. Got my business degree. Moved to Denver 5 years ago when I was 27. 3 years ago, I started Summit Cleaning Solutions with my own savings and a small business loan I paid back ahead of schedule. I built that company from scratch. Just me in a van at first, cleaning office buildings at night. Now I had 12 employees, specialized equipment, and annual revenue of $800,000. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every dollar earned through sweat and smart decisions. The last time I'd been home was 8 months ago. Everything seemed fine. My parents were talking about maybe retiring in a few years, turning the store over to whoever wanted to buy it. Tyler showed up for dinner one night, and I should have known something was brewing by the way he was acting. He had that look he always got when he thought he'd stumbled onto something big. Over meatloaf and mashed potatoes, he started pitching this cryptocurrency mining operation. He went on and on about guaranteed returns, life-changing wealth, getting in on the ground floor of the future. He used every buzzword you could imagine. I remember warning my parents right there at the table. I said it sounded like a scam, that cryptocurrency was volatile and unpredictable, that Tyler didn't have any real experience in that field. Tyler got angry, called me jealous, said I didn't understand modern business, that I was stuck in old school thinking just like our dad. My parents actually defended him. My mother said I was being too cautious, that I didn't support family dreams. My father said sometimes you have to take risks to really succeed. I left that visit angry. We barely spoke after that. I called on birthdays and holidays, kept conversations short. Now, sitting in my apartment at 2 in the morning, I understood why. They'd actually gone through with it. I called my mother back, my hands shaking. I needed to hear the full story. She picked up on the first ring, voice hoarse from crying. She told me everything. Tyler had convinced them to sell Henderson Hardware to a regional chain for $280,000. They'd given him $130,000 of it, kept $150,000 for retirement. Tyler promised he'd triple their investment in 6 months. He showed them documents, spreadsheets, testimonials from supposed investors. He was so convincing, so passionate. They wanted to believe in him. They wanted to see their younger son succeed. Then came the part that made my stomach drop. Tyler hadn't just lost the $130,000 in the cryptocurrency crash. He'd somehow convinced my parents to co-sign on business loans for another $90,000 in equipment. Mining rigs, he called them. specialized computers. When the cryptocurrency market crashed 3 months ago, everything vanished. The value of what he'd mined became worthless. The equipment was outdated and unsellable. Now the banks were coming after my parents for the $90,000 in defaulted loans. They'd already burned through most of their remaining $150,000, trying to make payments, trying to keep their heads above water. They had $23,000 left. The bank was threatening foreclosure on their house in 30 days. I asked where Tyler was. My mother's voice broke completely. He'd left town 2 weeks ago. Wasn't answering calls, texts, emails. Completely vanished. She'd driven to the warehouse space he'd rented in Omaha, 90 miles away. It was empty except for some worthless computer equipment. The landlord said Tyler had cleared out in the middle of the night, left 2 months' rent unpaid. I sat there trying to process it all. I wanted to help. These were my parents. But I didn't have $50,000 just sitting around. Summit Cleaning Solutions had good revenue, sure, but thin margins. Most of my money was tied up in equipment, payroll, operating expenses, the normal costs of running a business. I had maybe $15,000 in personal savings. That was it. I felt this crushing weight of guilt and anger and helplessness, all tangled together. I told my mother I needed time to think, to see what I could do. She begged me to hurry. 30 days wasn't much time. I promised I'd call back in the morning. After we hung up, I sat in the dark for hours, unable to sleep. The sun was coming up when I finally made a decision. I had to go home to Nebraska. I had to see this for myself, talk to my parents face to face, figure out if there was any possible solution. I called my business partner, Jake, told him I needed a few days for a family emergency. He understood, said he'd hold down the fort. I threw some clothes in a bag and started the 6-hour drive west. I pulled into my childhood driveway just after noon. The house looked terrible. The lawn was overgrown, weeds everywhere. The paint was peeling on the shutters. The whole place had an air of neglect and defeat. I'd never seen it like this. My parents had always kept everything neat and tidy. This was the visible evidence of their collapse. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in 8 months. Her hair was grayer, her face lined with stress and exhaustion. She hugged me tight, crying into my shoulder. My father appeared behind her. Frank Henderson had always been this strong, capable man. The guy everyone in Millbrook went to for advice, for a fair deal, for an honest opinion. Now he looked hollow. He barely made eye contact with me. His handshake was weak. The defeat in his posture was painful to see. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had that disastrous dinner 8 months ago. They walked me through the whole timeline again. Tyler had been working on them for over a year, planting seeds, telling them the hardware store business was dying, that big box retailers were taking over, that they needed to think about their future. He made them feel scared and obsolete. Then, he presented himself as the solution, the son with vision, with understanding of modern markets, with the path to real wealth. When the offer came in from the regional chain, $280,000, Tyler told them it was a gift, a chance to secure their retirement and set him up for success at the same time. My father admitted they were hesitant at first. They loved that store. But Tyler was relentless. He showed them projections, talked about cryptocurrency millionaires, made it sound like missing this opportunity would be the biggest mistake of their lives. After the sale closed, Tyler took the money immediately. He'd already found the warehouse space in Omaha, already had suppliers lined up for the equipment. For 2 months, he sent them regular updates, photos of the mining rigs running, screenshots of small deposits that were supposedly earnings from the operation. My parents were excited. It seemed to be working. Then the market crashed. Tyler admitted the business was failing, but said he could salvage it with better equipment, more powerful computers. That's when he pressured them to co-sign the $90,000 loan. They were desperate to recover their initial investment. They signed. 2 months later, Tyler confessed everything was gone. The mining operation had never actually worked properly. He'd been using money from the new loan to make those fake profit deposits, to keep them believing. A classic Ponzi scheme structure, except he was running it on his own parents. When the money ran out, and he couldn't keep up the charade anymore, he disappeared. I listened to all this, feeling sicker with every detail. But then my mother said something that stopped my heart. They told me that Tyler had pitched them on selling Henderson hardware a year ago, long before my last visit. They'd initially refused. But Tyler had told them something that changed their minds. He said that I had secretly called him months earlier. That I'd told him I wished they would sell the store so I could get my inheritance early to expand my Denver business. Tyler claimed I was too proud to ask them directly, so I'd asked him to feel them out. He made it seem like I desperately wanted this but wouldn't admit it. My parents had believed him. They said it seemed plausible because I'd been doing so well with Summit Cleaning Solutions. And they thought maybe I needed capital to grow. Tyler's lie was the final push that made them agree to sell. They never verified it with me because Tyler said I'd made him promise to keep it secret. I sat there stunned, realizing my brother had deliberately destroyed their trust in me to get what he wanted. He'd poisoned our relationship from a distance, and I'd had no idea. I told them I never said anything like that to Tyler, never even thought it. I built my business with my own money, and I was proud of that. My mother looked at me with this mixture of shame and confusion. My father just stared at the table. They'd believed Tyler so easily. That hurt more than almost anything else. I tried to explain my situation. I told them I wanted to help, but I didn't have $50,000 available. Summit Cleaning Solutions was successful, but every dollar was working. Equipment, payroll, insurance, rent, supplies. It all added up. I could maybe pull together $15,000 without seriously damaging the business operations. That was the truth. My father's face changed. The shame turned to something colder. He said, "You have a successful business in Denver. We gave up everything for family. Can't you do the same?" My mother added, "Tyler said you were selfish." Maybe he was right. I felt like I'd been slapped. They were resenting me now, blaming me for not immediately fixing the disaster Tyler had created. The logic was so twisted I could barely respond. I excused myself and went outside to call Jake. I needed to know exactly what our financial situation was. Jake ran the numbers with me. He confirmed we had thin cash reserves. We'd had unexpected equipment repairs last month that ate into savings. He could maybe help me pull together $25,000 without crippling the company, but that was the absolute maximum. Anything more would mean we couldn't make payroll, couldn't cover our existing obligations, and he warned me about something else. Our biggest client, a property management company worth $300,000 annually, was negotiating their contract renewal next month. If I wasn't back in Denver to handle it personally, we'd probably lose them. They'd specifically asked to work with me. Jake couldn't close that deal alone. I went back inside and tried to explain all this to my parents. The difference between revenue and profit. Cash flow. Operating expenses. They didn't want to hear it. They kept saying $800,000, like it was all just sitting in a bank account. My mother said Tyler had told them that businesses always claim they're cash poor to avoid helping family. I realized Tyler had poisoned them against me even more thoroughly than I'd thought. Every conversation I'd had with Tyler over the years, he'd probably twisted and reported back to make me look bad. I lay awake that night in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The room hadn't changed since high school. Same posters, same desk, same window looking out at the backyard where Tyler and I used to play as kids. Back when things were simple. Before money and greed and desperation turned everything ugly. I didn't know how to save my parents without destroying everything I'd built. And I wasn't even sure they deserved saving after how quickly they'd turned on me. But they were still my parents. That had to count for something. The next morning, I decided to try a different approach. I drove to the bank in downtown Millbrook, a small brick building I'd passed 1,000 times growing up. I asked to speak with the manager about my parents' situation. Craig Stevens came out to meet me. We'd gone to high school together, though he'd been a year ahead. He remembered me, shook my hand warmly, invited me into his office. At least someone in this town didn't think I was a villain. I explained that I was trying to help my parents and wanted to understand their options. Craig was sympathetic, but firm. He walked me through the loan documents. My parents were 3 months behind on a $90,000 business loan they'd co-signed for Tyler. The bank had already extended them 1 grace period. The board of directors wouldn't approve another extension. Without $47,000 in the next 30 days to bring the account current, foreclosure proceedings would begin automatically. There was no flexibility in the timeline. I asked if a partial payment would help. Could I give them $25,000 to buy more time? Craig said it might buy 2 more weeks, maybe 3, but the bank would still require the full amount eventually. And if my parents couldn't pay, they'd just be prolonging the inevitable. He advised me that the best solution was the full $47,000 now, or helping my parents sell the house before foreclosure, and at least walk away with some equity. Selling would be smarter financially, but I knew my parents would never agree to it. That house was all they had left. I left the bank feeling defeated. I sat in my car in the parking lot, trying to think of any possible solution. That's when I decided to go to the Bluebird Cafe, the local diner where everyone in Millbrook eventually showed up. I needed coffee and maybe some clarity. The waitress was Annie Brennan, someone I'd gone to high school with. She recognized me immediately, came over with a pot of coffee and a warm smile. We chatted for a few minutes. She asked about Denver, about my business. I kept things vague, said I was home helping my parents with some financial issues. Annie's expression changed. She lowered her voice and said she'd heard about what happened with Tyler. Small towns have no secrets. She said her cousin had seen Tyler just yesterday, 2 towns over in Hastings. He was at a bar, apparently with some woman, throwing money around, buying drinks for everyone. My heart started racing. I asked Annie if she was sure. She nodded. Her cousin was certain it was Tyler. Same guy, unmistakable. I paid for my coffee and drove straight to Hastings, 45 minutes west. I checked 3 bars before I found him at a sports bar called Legends. And there he was, my brother Tyler, sitting at a high-top table, laughing loud, wearing clothes I'd never seen before. Expensive sneakers, designer jeans, a leather jacket that probably cost $500. Next to him was a blonde woman in her late 20s, hanging on his arm. They both had drinks. Tyler looked relaxed, happy, completely unburdened. I walked right up to his table. Tyler saw me, and his face went white, then red. He said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I told him we needed to talk outside. Now, he tried to play it cool, told the blonde he'd be right back. We went out to the parking lot. The second we were alone, I grabbed him by his fancy jacket and shoved him against a car. I demanded to know where he got money for new clothes and bar tabs if he was supposedly broke. Tyler pushed me off, trying to act tough. He said business is business. Sometimes you lose. It wasn't personal. I asked him again about the money. He smirked and said he'd moved on to better opportunities. That's when I told him I'd call the police, report him for fraud. Tyler actually laughed. He said, "For what? Bad business decisions aren't illegal. Mom and Dad signed everything willingly. I didn't forge anything. I didn't steal anything. They gave me money for a business venture. It failed. That's capitalism. Big brother." I realized he was right. Legally, he probably hadn't committed a prosecutable crime, but I pushed harder. I said I'd make sure everyone in Millbrook knew what he did, that I'd ruin his reputation. Tyler's smirk faded a little. Then he dropped the bomb. He said he didn't lose all the money in the cryptocurrency crash. He'd actually pulled out $70,000 before the collapse. He saw it coming and cashed out early. He left the remaining $60,000 and all the loan money to burn. He'd been living off that $70,000 for months. Had no intention of ever helping our parents. He considered it payment for putting up with their boring small-town bullshit his whole life. I was so angry I could barely see straight. I asked him how he could do this to his own parents. Tyler shrugged. Said they'd chosen to believe him. That was their mistake. Then the blonde woman came out, told Tyler to come back inside. Tyler introduced her as Crystal. Said they were driving to Vegas tomorrow, going to really invest the money, right this time. He was completely shameless, completely without remorse. I wanted to hit him. My fist was clenched. Tyler saw it and said, "Go ahead, hit me. Then you'll be the one with a criminal record, and Mom and Dad will still lose the house anyway. You'll just make everything worse like you always do." He got in his car, a new leased BMW, and drove away. I stood there shaking with rage and helplessness, watching my brother escape consequences again. I took photos of his license plate, thought about calling the police anyway. But I called a lawyer friend in Denver first, explained the whole situation. She confirmed what Tyler had said. Unless I could prove fraud with fake documents or forged signatures, there was no criminal case. Parents willingly giving money to their adult child for a business venture, even a stupid one, wasn't illegal. Even the $70,000 Tyler kept wasn't prosecutable unless there was a written agreement about returning profits. There wasn't. Tyler had been careful, or lucky, or both. That's when Jake called me. My stomach dropped before I even answered. He said our biggest client had just moved up the contract renewal meeting to next week. They wanted to discuss some concerns and finalize terms. Jake couldn't handle it alone. The client specifically wanted to meet with me, wanted to talk about expanding the scope of services. This was our chance to grow the contract from $300,000 to maybe $400,000 annually. But if I didn't come back to Denver in 3 days, Jake was almost certain we'd lose them entirely. He'd heard through the grapevine they were getting quotes from competitors. Losing that contract would drop our annual revenue by nearly 40%. We'd have to lay off half our staff. The business might not survive. Jake's voice was firm when he said, "Barton, I know your family needs you, but our 12 employees need you too. Their families depend on these paychecks. You have to come back." I sat in my car in that parking lot in Hastings, Nebraska, feeling completely trapped. My brother was getting away with everything. My parents blamed me for not fixing it. My girlfriend and my business both needed me back in Denver. And I still had no solution to any of it. I drove back to Millbrook in silence, my mind racing through impossible scenarios. When I got to my parents' house that evening, I told them I'd found Tyler. I explained about the $70,000 he'd kept, about Vegas, about Crystal and the BMW and the designer clothes. I expected them to be outraged. I expected them to finally see Tyler for what he really was. Instead, they just got quiet. They exchanged this uncomfortable glance. I asked them what was wrong. My mother started crying again. My father cleared his throat and said they needed to talk about a solution. They'd been discussing options while I was gone. I said I could get them the $25,000. It would buy some time at least. My father interrupted me. He said that wasn't enough. They needed the full $47,000. I tried to explain again about my business limitations. That's when my mother said something that made my blood run cold. "We know about your business, honey. We looked it up online." They'd spent the day researching Summit Cleaning Solutions. They'd found public business filings that showed our gross revenue of $800,000. They didn't understand the difference between revenue and profit. They thought I personally made $800,000 a year and was refusing to give them $47,000 to save their home. My father said, "You're making $800,000 a year, and you won't give us $47,000 to save our home?" I tried to explain revenue versus profit, operating costs, payroll, equipment, taxes, insurance. They didn't want to hear it. My mother said Tyler had told them that businesses always claim they're cash poor to avoid helping family. There it was again. Tyler's poison. Still working even though he was gone. Then my father said something that absolutely stunned me. "We think you should make us partners in your company." I just stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. He laid out their plan. They wanted me to sign over 20% of Summit Cleaning Solutions to them. They'd use that ownership stake as collateral to get a loan for the $47,000. I'd be responsible for repaying that loan from business profits over time. This way they'd save the house and have ongoing income from my business. My father added, "We gave 30 years to a business that we sold for you kids. The least you can do is share yours." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd built Summit Cleaning Solutions from nothing. From a van and a dream and my own savings. I'd worked 16-hour days for 3 years. Every client, every employee, every piece of equipment represented my own sweat and risk. And now my parents wanted 20% of it because Tyler had destroyed them and they needed someone to blame who was actually available. I tried to explain how insane this was. They'd contributed nothing to my business. I'd never asked them for money, never expected anything from them. My mother said, "We're your parents. We raised you. That's contribution enough." My father added, "Tyler said you'd react like this. Said you only care about yourself." Everything came back to Tyler. Even absent, even exposed as a thief, he was still controlling their perception of me. I asked bitterly, "And where's Tyler now? Why isn't he giving you 20% of anything?" My father snapped. "Tyler made a mistake. You're choosing to abandon us." The argument escalated. Voices got raised. They accused me of being cold, ungrateful, selfish. I pointed out they'd given $130,000 to Tyler without hesitation, but were calling me selfish for not having $47,000 in liquid cash. My mother cried, "Because we believed Tyler would succeed. You've already succeeded, so you should help us." The twisted logic was unbelievable, but they genuinely believed it. In their minds, my success meant I owed them. Tyler's failure meant he deserved sympathy. I was being punished for doing things right. That's when my phone rang. It was Rachel, my girlfriend back in Denver. We'd been together for 2 years. It was serious. We'd talked about marriage. I stepped outside to take the call. Rachel sounded upset. She said she needed to talk to me about something important. I said I was in the middle of a crisis. Could it wait? She said no. She needed to know right now if I was planning to move back to Nebraska. I was confused. I asked why she'd think that. Rachel explained that my mother had called her that afternoon. Told Rachel I was coming home to help run the family business situation. Implied I might be staying permanently. Asked if Rachel would be supportive of what my family needed. Rachel was worried I was making major life decisions without discussing them with her. I realized my mother was already acting like I'd agreed to their insane partnership plan. I told Rachel I wasn't moving. I'd be back in Denver soon. My mother had no right to call her. Rachel's voice was uncertain. She said, "Barton, your family is pulling you in 100 directions and you're letting them. We need to talk about boundaries when you get back." There was tension in her voice I'd never heard before. She said she loved me but needed to go. We hung up with this uncomfortable distance between us. I stood there in the driveway, looking at the house where I grew up. My parents were inside, believing I was selfish for not giving them part of my company. My brother was in Vegas spending money he'd stolen from them. My girlfriend was questioning our relationship. My biggest client meeting was in 3 days, and I still had no idea how to fix any of it without destroying myself in the process. I couldn't face going back into that house. I drove around Millbrook aimlessly for hours. Eventually, I ended up at the location where Henderson Hardware used to be. The regional chain had completely transformed it. New signs, new layout, all the personality stripped away. It was just another corporate store now. All the history, all the memories, erased like they'd never existed. I stood in the parking lot remembering my childhood, feeling this profound grief for everything that had been lost. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "We need your answer tomorrow morning. Bank needs to know our plan." The pressure was relentless. I checked into a motel on the edge of town. I couldn't sleep in that house. Couldn't breathe in that environment. I called Jake again. Explained the partnership demand my parents were making. Jake was horrified. He explained that giving away 20% would be insane from a business perspective. They'd have legal rights to financial information, input on major decisions. They could complicate everything. Plus, if they used it as loan collateral and defaulted again, creditors could force the sale of my ownership stake. I could lose control of my own company. Jake said, "Barton, I love that you want to help your parents, but this isn't help. This is self-destruction." I knew he was right, but the guilt was crushing me. These were my parents. They'd raised me, fed me, put me through college. Didn't I owe them something? But then I thought about my 12 employees, about their families, about Rachel, about everything I'd worked for. How much was I supposed to sacrifice for people who'd believed Tyler's lies about me so easily? I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I drove to my parents' house to give them my answer. I'd decided to offer the $25,000 with no strings attached, but refuse the partnership. It wasn't enough, but it was all I could do without destroying my own life. When I pulled up, there was an unfamiliar car in the driveway. Inside, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table with a man in a suit. He introduced himself as Dennis Walsh, an attorney. I asked what was happening. My father said, "Since you were taking so long to decide, we got legal advice about our options." Walsh looked uncomfortable. He explained that my parents had consulted him about forcing me to help. They'd wanted to know if they could sue me for elder financial abuse or abandonment. Walsh had to tell them that wasn't legally viable. But during the consultation, something else came up. My parents had mentioned they'd loaned me $15,000 8 years ago for college expenses. I'd completely forgotten about it. I'd paid it back over time in small amounts. I thought it was settled years ago. Walsh asked if there was documentation. My parents pulled out an old promissory note I'd signed when I was 19 years old. I barely remembered signing it. At that age, I hadn't understood legal documents. My parents had helped me with the paperwork, told me it was just a formality. Walsh examined the note. His face was grave. He said the note included a clause about a balloon payment of remaining principal plus interest, if not repaid within 5 years. I had repaid it, but in small amounts over 7 years, not 5. Walsh calculated that with compound interest at the rate specified in the note, plus penalties for late payment, I technically still owed $41,000. The note was legally enforceable. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. That promissory note was from when I was a teenager. I'd had no understanding of balloon payments or compound interest. My parents had helped me fill it out. They'd never mentioned I owed additional money. I'd paid back what I thought I owed, and they'd accepted the payments without ever saying there was a problem. Now they were using it as a weapon. My father said coldly, "We're not trying to hurt you, but we need that money. You legally owe it. Pay us the $41,000. We'll forgive the other $6,000, and we can all move on." My mother added, "If you just give us the partnership stake, we'll forgive the entire debt." That's the better deal, honey. I realized this was planned. They'd consulted Walsh before even giving me a chance to answer their original demand. They'd ambushed me. Walsh looked genuinely uncomfortable. He said to me, "Mr. Henderson, I advised your parents that pursuing this would severely damage your relationship, but legally, they do have a case." I looked at this lawyer. then at my parents, and asked Walsh, "Did they tell you they gave my brother $130,000 that he stole from them? Did they mention he kept $70,000 and is currently in Vegas spending it? Did they tell you any of that?" Walsh looked surprised. He said no. They'd only mentioned Tyler had a failed business venture. I laid out the whole story. Tyler's manipulation, the fake profit reports. The $70,000 he kept, Vegas, everything. Walsh's expression changed. He looked at my parents with something like disappointment. He said, "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, this changes the ethical picture considerably. Your other son's behavior was predatory. Barton's situation is entirely different." My father got angry. He said, "Tyler made mistakes. Barton is refusing to help. Those are different things." My mother added, "We need the money, and Barton has it. That's what matters." Walsh gathered his papers, clearly uncomfortable with where this was heading. He told my parents he'd send them his bill for the consultation and left. I stood there staring at the people who'd raised me, barely recognizing them. That's when Rachel called. I stepped outside, my hands shaking. Rachel was crying. She said she couldn't do this anymore. My mother had called her 3 more times since yesterday. The last call was this morning. My mother had told Rachel I was struggling with maturity and family responsibility. Asked Rachel to encourage me to do the right thing. Rachel felt manipulated, caught in the middle, and didn't know what to believe anymore. She said, "Barton, I love you, but I can't be in a relationship where your family is going to manipulate and guilt you forever. You need to set boundaries. Until you do, I need space." She asked for a break, said she needed time to think about whether we had a future together. I tried to explain what was really happening, but Rachel said she needed to go. We hung up with our relationship in pieces. I stood in my parents' front yard, everything collapsing around me. My relationship was falling apart. My parents were threatening me with a legal claim for $41,000. My business was in jeopardy. Tyler was in Vegas, living his best life. Every option led to destruction. If I paid my parents from business funds, I'd cripple Summit Cleaning Solutions. If I refused, they'd sue me, and the legal costs and distraction would destroy my business anyway. If I gave them the partnership stake, I'd lose control of everything I'd built. There was no winning move. Tyler had won completely, and I was losing everything. I got in my car and drove straight back to Denver. I didn't say goodbye to my parents. I couldn't look at them anymore. The 6-hour drive passed in a blur. I made it back, just in time for the big client meeting the next morning. But my head wasn't in it. I went through the motions, presented our proposal for expanded services, answered questions, but the client could tell I was distracted. Their facilities manager said they'd think about the renewal and get back to us. That's corporate speak for no. I'd blown it. Jake pulled me aside after they left. He looked worried. He said, "Without that contract, we were in serious trouble. We'd have to lay off at least 6 people within a month. The remaining business wouldn't cover our overhead. Summit Cleaning Solutions would probably fold within 6 months. Everything I'd built for 3 years, gone." Jake asked what I wanted to do. I admitted I didn't know. I was out of ideas, out of energy, out of hope. I went home to my apartment. There was a note from Rachel on the kitchen counter. She'd taken some of her things, clothes and toiletries. The note said she was staying with her sister for a while. It said, "I love you, but I can't watch you destroy yourself for people who don't appreciate you. When you decide to choose your own life, call me." I read it 3 times, then sat on the couch and broke down. I actually cried for the first time since this nightmare started. Everything was crumbling. My family, my relationship, my business, all of it falling apart at once. I couldn't sleep that night. Around 3 in the morning, I started going through old boxes in my closet, looking for anything related to that $15,000 loan from 8 years ago. I needed to understand what I'd actually signed, whether my parents' claim was legitimate. I found a folder of old college documents, financial aid papers, loan statements, letters from my parents, and then I found emails. Printed emails from 8 years ago, between me and my parents, about that loan. In one email, my mother had written, "We're so proud of you, honey. This isn't a real loan. It's just paperwork for tax purposes. You pay us back whatever you can, whenever you can. No pressure, no interest, no deadlines. You're our son, not a bank customer." Another email from my father said, "Your mother's right. The promissory note is just for our accountant. Don't worry about the technical language. It doesn't mean anything. Family helps family. Period." I stared at these emails, my heart pounding. They directly contradicted everything my parents were claiming now. These emails proved they'd never intended to enforce those harsh terms. The promissory note was supposed to be a formality for tax purposes, nothing more. I took photos of every email with my phone. This was evidence. This could invalidate their entire legal threat. First thing in the morning, I called Dennis Walsh, my parents' attorney. I read him the emails word for word. There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, Walsh said, "Mr. Henderson, these emails would likely invalidate enforcement of the penalty clauses. They demonstrate the note wasn't a true arm's-length transaction, and the terms weren't intended to be enforced. If your parents sued, you'd have a strong defense." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm going to advise them to drop this. This isn't right." I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in over a week, I felt a spark of hope. But I wasn't done. I spent the entire day digging deeper, looking for any leverage I could find. I called the property management company that had bought Henderson Hardware. I spoke to their acquisitions manager, asked about the sale terms. He pulled up the file and told me the purchase price was actually $320,000, not $280,000 like my parents had said. They'd lied to me about how much they got, probably to hide how much they'd really given Tyler. Or maybe Tyler had lied to them too. Either way, there was $40,000 unaccounted for. I called Annie back in Millbrook, asked if she could find out more about Tyler's current location. She made some calls and reported back. Tyler and Crystal were still in Vegas, staying at the Bellagio, living large, gambling, eating at expensive restaurants. Annie's cousin's boyfriend was a cop in Hastings. He'd run Tyler's license plate as a favor. Tyler had 3 outstanding parking tickets and a warrant for a missed court date on a reckless driving charge from 2 months ago. It was a minor warrant, but it was something. Tyler wasn't as untouchable as he thought. Then I called Craig Stevens at the bank in Millbrook. I asked if the bank would be willing to hear a proposal directly from me, bypassing my parents. Craig said normally the bank wouldn't negotiate with third parties, but given the unusual circumstances and my connection to the community, he'd listen. I proposed that I'd pay $25,000 immediately to bring the loan current. My parents would then refinance the remaining balance with the house as collateral at better terms, spreading the payments out. Craig said he'd present it to the board. He thought they'd approve since it solved the immediate default problem. But my parents would have to agree to the refinancing terms. I knew my parents wouldn't agree to anything unless I forced them to see reality. So, I made one more call. I hired a private investigator in Las Vegas, gave him Tyler's description, told him where he was staying, asked him to document everything Tyler was doing and how much he was spending. The PI called me back within hours. He had photos, videos, casino transaction records. Tyler had lost $15,000 at a poker table the previous night alone. He was burning through the money at an incredible rate. The PI estimated Tyler would be broke again within 2 months at his current pace. I had everything I needed now. Evidence that my parents' legal threat was baseless. Proof that Tyler had kept significant money and was wasting it. Documentation of Tyler's minor warrant. A viable plan to save my parents' house on my terms. It was time to stop being the victim. Time to stop letting Tyler and my parents control this situation. I booked a flight to Vegas for the next morning, and I booked a second ticket for my father. He was going to see Tyler's true nature firsthand, whether he wanted to or not. I flew to Millbrook first thing in the morning, drove straight to my parents' house. I walked in without knocking. My father was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, the same routine he'd had for 30 years. I said, "Dad, get in the car. We're going to Vegas. You need to see something." He looked confused, started to protest. I cut him off. "Get in the car or lose your house. Your choice. For once in your life, trust me instead of Tyler." Something in my voice must have convinced him. He stood up, told my mother he'd be back later, and followed me out. We drove to Omaha in silence, caught the afternoon flight to Vegas. The flight was tense. My father finally asked what we were doing. I said, "You're going to see who your son Tyler really is. Then you're going to help me fix this mess." He didn't ask any more questions. We landed in Vegas around 5 in the evening. My PI had been tracking Tyler all day. Sent me regular updates. Tyler was at a high-stakes poker table at the Bellagio. We took a cab straight there. I told my father we were just going to watch for a few minutes. We found the poker room. And there he was, Tyler Henderson, my younger brother, sitting at a table with a stack of chips worth at least $20,000. He was drunk, loud, laughing at something another player said. Crystal was draped on his shoulder, clearly intoxicated too. They both looked like they were having the time of their lives. My father's face went pale. He'd been holding on to this idea that Tyler had made mistakes, that the money was really gone, that his younger son was struggling somewhere feeling guilty. The reality in front of him shattered that illusion. I let him watch for a full 5 minutes. Watch Tyler throw chips around carelessly, order expensive drinks, act like he didn't have a care in the world. Then I walked up to the table with my father following behind me. Tyler saw us, and his face transformed. First, white with shock, then red with anger. He said, "What the hell are you doing here?" I said calmly, "Collecting what you owe." Tyler laughed nervously, told Crystal he'd be right back. We stepped away from the table, found a quiet corner of the casino floor. Tyler tried to act tough, said, "I don't owe you anything, big brother." I pulled out my phone, showed my father the documentation my PI had compiled. Photos of Tyler's spending over the last 3 days, totaling $48,000. Casino records showing he'd withdrawn $65,000 from an account last week. This was the money Tyler had claimed was lost in the cryptocurrency crash. My father stared at the evidence, his hands shaking. Tyler watched his father's face, saw the realization dawning. I said to Tyler, "You have 2 choices. Wire Mom and Dad $47,000 right now, tonight, or I'm calling the Hastings police about your outstanding warrant. You'll be extradited back to Nebraska to face charges. Then I'm filing a civil suit for fraud and elder financial abuse. I've got evidence you lied about projected returns, created fake profit statements, and deliberately withheld information about the market crash. That's fraud. It's actionable. You'll spend the next 2 years in court, and every penny you have left will go to lawyers." Tyler's face went through several emotions: fear, anger, calculation. Then he sneered and said, "Go ahead. Sue me. I'll just declare bankruptcy. You'll get nothing, and Mom and Dad will still lose the house." I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. I said, "You're right. I'm not actually interested in suing you." Tyler looked confused. I continued, "I'm interested in Dad here understanding what you really are, and in you knowing that I have all this evidence ready to send to every single person in Millbrook, Every business contact Mom and Dad ever had. Every friend, every relative, every neighbor. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you did. How you stole from your own parents. How you lied and manipulated them. How you're here in Vegas gambling away the money you took from them. Tyler's face changed. He realized I was threatening the one thing he might actually care about. His reputation. His ability to ever show his face. In his hometown again, I added. Small towns have long memories, Tyler. You'll never be able to go back. And I'll make sure this follows you everywhere. Every future employer will know. Every business partner. Every woman you date. They'll all know you're a thief who destroyed his own family. My father suddenly spoke, his voice shaking. Tyler, is this all true? Everything Barton is saying? Tyler looked at our father, and for just a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. Then it hardened into resentment. He said, "Yeah, it's true. All of it. You and Mom were marks, and I played you. That store was worthless to me, but the cash wasn't. I took what I could get." My father actually staggered. I caught his arm to steady him. Tyler wasn't done. He said, "You always loved Barton more anyway. The perfect son. The one who did everything right. Well, look at him now, begging me for money to save you. How does it feel, knowing your favorite failed you?" The cruelty in his voice was shocking, even to me. Something broke in my father right then. He looked at Tyler like he was seeing him clearly for the first time in his life. Then he turned to me, and there were tears in his eyes. He said, "I'm sorry. God, Barton, I'm so sorry." I put my hand on his shoulder. My father looked back at Tyler and said, "You're not my son anymore. Keep your money. I don't want anything from you. I'd rather lose the house than take another cent you touched." Tyler laughed, but it sounded hollow. He said, "You'll lose everything. You need me." My father said without turning back, "We already lost everything when we believed you." We walked away. Tyler called after us, but we didn't stop. We walked out of that casino and got in a cab back to the airport. On the flight home, my father completely broke down. He apologized over and over. Told me how Tyler had manipulated them, played on their fears about retirement and their desire to see both sons successful. He admitted they'd been desperate and foolish, that they'd blamed me because facing the truth about Tyler was too painful. He said, "Your mother and I tried to take from you what Tyler stole from us. We knew it was wrong, but we were so scared and angry. Can you ever forgive us?" I was quiet for a long time, looking out at the darkness beyond the airplane window. Finally, I said, "I don't know yet, Dad, but I'm willing to try." He nodded, accepting that answer. I explained my plan to him. The $25,000 payment I could make to bring the loan current, the refinancing terms Craig Stevens could offer, how they could save the house if they were willing to work with me instead of against me. My father asked, "Why would you still help us after everything we did?" I said, "Because you're my parents. I'm not doing this for you. Exactly. I'm doing it because it's who I choose to be. Tyler chose to be a thief. You and Mom chose desperation. I choose to be better than all of that. I choose integrity, even when it costs me." We flew back to Omaha, drove to Millbrook in the early morning hours. My mother was awake, frantic with worry about where we'd been. My father told her everything, about Vegas, about Tyler's confession, about the money he'd kept and wasted. My mother collapsed into a chair and sobbed. She looked up at me and said, "I'm so sorry, Barton. We were horrible to you. You were trying to help, and we treated you like the enemy." I sat down with both of them and laid out the terms. I would pay the $25,000 to save their house. But this was it. This was the only time. They needed to understand I had my own life, my own responsibilities. my own business that couldn't be their safety net. They had to refinance the remaining balance and handle their own payments going forward. And they had to stop letting Tyler manipulate them, stop making excuses for him, and accept that he'd made his choices. We called Dennis Walsh together, and my parents formally withdrew any claim on that old loan. Walsh actually came to the house that afternoon and tore up the promissory note in front of all of us. I wired the $25,000 to the bank. Craig Stevens called back within an hour, said the board approved the refinancing at reasonable terms. My parents' house was saved. Their monthly payments would be tight on their Social Security income, but manageable if they budgeted carefully. They wouldn't lose their home. I drove back to Denver that same day. I needed to salvage what was left of my life there. I called Rachel and asked if we could talk. She agreed to meet me. I told her everything that had happened, showed her the boundaries I'd set with my parents, the clear limits I'd established. I explained that I'd helped them this one time, but I'd made it clear I wouldn't let them manipulate or guilt me ever again. If they couldn't respect my boundaries, I'd walk away completely. Rachel listened to everything. When I finished, she said, "I'm proud of you." That took real courage. It would have been easier to just give them what they wanted, or to cut them off completely. You found a harder path, the right path. We decided to work on our relationship slowly, rebuild the trust that had been damaged. It wouldn't happen overnight, but we were both willing to try. At Summit Cleaning Solutions, I refocused completely. I called the property management company and asked for one more meeting. I was honest with them, told them I'd been dealing with a family crisis, but it was resolved now. I pitched new services, showed them detailed proposals for expanded cleaning protocols. This time I was fully present, fully engaged. They saw the difference. They agreed to renew the contract with an expanded scope, increasing it from $300,000 to $375,000 annually. My business was saved. Jake was relieved and impressed. He said, "Whatever happened in Nebraska, you came back stronger." Over the following months, I slowly rebuilt my savings. Summit Cleaning Solutions grew steadily. I added 3 new employees. Rachel and I moved in together. We talked seriously about our future, about marriage, about the life we wanted to build. 3 months later, Annie called me from Millbrook. She said Tyler had come back to town, completely broke. He'd gambled away every dollar in Vegas. Crystal had left him the moment the money ran out. He was living in a rundown apartment in Omaha, working at a warehouse for minimum wage. He'd tried to contact our parents once, but they'd refused to see him. He was facing the consequences of his choices, alone, and with nothing. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing this, just sadness at the waste of it all. Tyler could have been anything, done anything. Instead, he'd chosen greed and cruelty, and now he had nothing, not even his family. 6 months after everything happened, I drove back to Millbrook for Christmas. My relationship with my parents was still healing, still complicated, but improving. They were respectful of my boundaries now, grateful for the help I'd given them. My mother had started working part-time at the town library to help with bills. My father was volunteering at the community center, teaching a woodworking class. They seemed lighter somehow, freed from Tyler's manipulation and their own desperate schemes. On Christmas Eve, we sat around their modest tree. The house was warm and smelled like my mother's cinnamon cookies. My father raised his glass of eggnog and said, "I learned something this year. Real family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about character. Tyler is my blood. But you, Barton, you're my son. There's a difference," my mother added. "We confused enabling with love. We gave Tyler everything and taught him nothing. We're grateful you taught us better." I realized sitting there that I'd forgiven them, mostly. Some wounds would always be there. Some scars don't fully fade. But we were healing together. That was enough. The next morning, I stood in the driveway before heading back to Denver. I looked at the house, saved now, truly theirs, through honest means. I thought about how close we'd all come to losing everything, not just the house or the money, but ourselves. Our integrity, our relationships, our sense of who we were. I understood now that real strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you choose to rise. It's about the decisions you make when everything is falling apart. Tyler had chosen to take everything he could. My parents had chosen desperation and blame. I'd chosen to hold on to my integrity, even when it would have been easier to give in or give up. I got in my car and called Rachel. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm. She asked how Christmas had gone. I said, "It was good. Really good. I'm coming home tomorrow. Want to start planning that future we talked about?" She laughed and said, "I thought you'd never ask." I drove away as snow began to fall, covering Millbrook in white. The town looked peaceful, almost like a Christmas card. I thought about everything that had happened this year. The betrayal, the loss, the pain, and finally, the healing. People always say family is everything, but I learned that's not quite right. Character is everything. Integrity is everything. Family is only as valuable as the principles it's built on. My brother took everything he could get. My parents lost their way trying to fix it. I almost lost myself trying to save them. But in the end, we all learned the same hard lesson. You can't buy back integrity once you've sold it, but you can earn it again through hard choices and honest living. It took hitting rock bottom for all of us to find solid ground. But once we did, we rebuilt on a foundation that would actually last. And that made all the difference. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where family expected you to sacrifice everything you'd built? Where someone you loved betrayed your trust in ways you never imagined possible? How did you handle it? Did you set boundaries, or did you give in to the pressure? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences might help someone else facing similar struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and realize they're not alone in facing difficult family dynamics. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal, finding strength, and choosing integrity even when it costs you. And share this video with anyone who might need to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with family, that helping someone doesn't mean destroying yourself in the process. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it gave you something to think about. Maybe even some courage if you're facing your own impossible situation. Remember, you're not responsible for fixing every problem your family creates. You're only responsible for who you choose to be in the face of those problems. Choose integrity. Choose boundaries. Choose yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Take care of yourselves out there, and I'll see you in the next story.